Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history, they make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. We have a great CFO whom I've been looking forward to having as my guest for quite some time. Her name is Scarlett O'Sullivan. She's the CFO of Leaf Home. Scarlett, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Jack, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and me too. I've followed your career for a little bit since your first CFO job, which we'll get into in a little bit. But Leaf Home, exciting company. You guys are doing some great things, but not yet a household name. We'll give it a year or two and then it will be. Maybe you can tell our audience that the 10,000-foot view about what Leaf Home is all about.
Sure, happy to. So Leaf Home is a leading direct-to-consumer home improvement company in North America. We've been around since 2005, and we originally started in gutter installation, gutter protection. And since then, we've added a number of other products, for example, water filtration, bathroom conversion, stair lifts, and a number of other products like garage flooring as well. We have 200 locations throughout the United States, so we're able to cover about 85% of US zip codes, so quite a bit of scale. And we've gathered about 1.5 million customers in North America today.
Well, that's great. Then that's quite a success story, and we'll love to explore that a little bit. But before we get to Leaf Home, I want to get a little bit about your own background. Where'd you grow up, Scarlett?
So it's a bit of a complicated story. I'm originally from France, and I was an expat child growing up. So I grew up throughout South America and also Europe. And then I ended up back in France for my last 2 years of high school before coming to the US for college.
Oh, nice. You went to high school in France. That is so cool. So
split time, partly in Paris and actually partly in Madrid as well. So that's
okay, cool.
My last 4 years.
That's great stuff. And I'm always curious, and yours might be different than some of the other guests we've had, but what was your first job of any sort? Not your first professional job, but maybe as a teenager or a college student.
It was probably in high school when I was doing, and this is going to sound so incredibly cliche, but as a math tutor. So very, very, very early inkling towards numbers, really enjoyed numbers, and I helped out and taught geometry.
That's pretty cool. So yeah, mine was Burger King. So I think I probably have you beat on that, Burger King or math tutor. I don't know. So cool. And then you went to Yale and Wharton for undergrad and grad school. And I want to talk about that. I guess you couldn't get into any good schools, I guess. Is that your parents must have just been devastated, right? That you ended up with a couple of safety schools. So
well, it's interesting that you should say that because I had never lived in the US. So I was actually pretty excited to come over here. It was one of the things my parents really instilled in me growing up, that going to America was this dream and something they had wished they had done as kids. So I went to American schools, even though I lived in all these different countries, and always had this hope to get to the US, and was lucky to get into Yale with a bit of culture shock, as you can imagine, coming from overseas. But a really great experience. And then, of course, as you mentioned, I ended up at Wharton. I actually did that while I was working. So that was an executive MBA that I did while I was a banker.
Cool. That's a great experience. So I read an article about 3 weeks ago. It's kind of funny, but it had like the most famous fictional graduate at all of the schools. Do you know who it might have been for Yale?
Fictional graduate?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna let you tell me.
Thurston Howell III from Gilligan's Island.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't grow up on Gilligan's Island, right? So I'm missing a little bit of that subtlety there.
You didn't get to appreciate the genius of Sherwood Schwartz until you're an adult, or maybe when your children were kids. But that and the Brady Bunch, like it survived for generations. Yeah, like MIT, they had a lot of them. And I think maybe I forget the Iron Man, I forget his name, but Tony Clark, whatever it was, The True Identity of Iron Man. He was deemed the most famous fictional MIT graduate.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, so he or Thurston Howell the third. I don't know why I go on these tangents. Jess will have to edit that out later. So cool. So I want to chat a little about your career journey. You mentioned you were at Wharton while you got an executive MBA along the way, but you started out in investment banking. You worked at Robbie Stevens, as we called it. Perhaps people who worked there did not, and Morgan Stanley. What was that experience like?
Sure. So, Morgan Stanley was actually the first one. So I started there right out of school, and I went into equity capital markets, and I really wanted to just, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. People were talking about investment banking. There was heavy recruiting on campus. A lot of the econ majors gravitated towards that, but I really had no idea what it meant, but wanted to experience it. I was in New York and started there. Felt like I might miss out on corporate finance, and requested to move my second year, and really had a chance to experience a bit more of what I thought investment banking was supposed to be like. Um, was covering the aerospace and defense space as my first industry, conglomerates, and really, frankly, just wasn't sure if it was for me, but wanted to see, perhaps it was, the size of the business, perhaps it was being in New York. And Robertson Stevens was something that happened and came up. I got a call, and I had an inkling towards technology. I was always really curious what it would be like to be in California. And so I decided, let me go see what investment banking is like at a totally different place, much smaller place. And sure enough, I found out that I liked it quite a bit. I ended up staying for 8 years and covering a number of different technology spaces with Robbie Stevens in San Francisco, in New York, and then on to London. So, I'm very grateful for those years. I think it's incredible training. I'm quantitative and analytical, and that was great training to be able to gather those skills. So a good way to start. And, I first wasn't sure, but really found out that I quite liked it, and loved working with management teams and crafting stories and taking companies public, which is mostly what I did.
That's fantastic. You also spent 9 years at SoftBank, a different sort of role, right? What was that like? Were you a partner at SoftBank, I think?
Yeah, so I mentioned I ended up in London. I actually took a break, Jack. So I ended up taking 6 years off.
Oh,
I
really? Wow. So
a banker, but you had told me earlier in my life that I would do that. I never would have guessed that I would. But I ended up in Tokyo really as a trailing spouse. And it was while I was there and was itching to get back into my career. I was quite certain I didn't want to go back to banking, but had always been really curious what it would be like as an investor. And I ended up joining a VC fund that was sponsored by SoftBank, that was based out of Hong Kong, and I was based in Tokyo. So I actually got a chance to go to headquarters from time to time in Tokyo at SoftBank, and brought the job back with me to New York when my husband moved back to the US, but was quite enjoyed moving from very transactional banking deals to investments, and spending more time looking for investments, but also having a chance to monitor, to continue to understand what the businesses were doing, to see how they would get to their goals. So that was a good transition. The dynamic of being in a remote office with headquarters in Japan definitely was something to be navigated, since they were such an important investor of ours. But an amazing experience, and very grateful to have had the experience. I did both early stage as well as late stage investing with SoftBank.
oh, interesting. So you had a great run, and you became a CFO at Rent the Runway, and it is happening more and more, but it's still a little bit unusual for somebody to go from that world directly to a CFO type of role. And do you think it's a good career path and a viable career path, or do you think you're a little bit of an aberration for somebody who aspires to become a CFO?
So I do think at the time, remember that was now, just about 9 years ago is when I joined and became a CFO at Rent the Runway. And I think it was pretty unusual then. It feels like we're seeing more of that now, whether it's bankers or investors moving towards operator roles. But I remember, the board having a bit of pause on that. And did that make sense to have someone who had never been inside of a company help to navigate the next stage of the company's growth? And there was a lot of transformation that was ahead of us. So I feel fortunate that it happened. I feel fortunate that they took a chance on that kind of a transition. And I do think it was more unusual then. Having said that, I wear three hats. and I still wear them today, right? So I do think the banking hat, which is about, strategy and thinking about, could this be something that ultimately could become a public company or something that might be an acquisition at some point or an acquirer. And at the same time, the investor hat and minding that investor constituent, those hats were hats that I wore all the time when I was, at Rent the Runway, and I wear them here as well. So even though it is unusual, I feel like it has been, for me, it has really helped me in my role. I constantly use those perspectives as I think about where we are as a business today, where we want to be in the future. So I also think it's a way for CFOs, or aspiring CFOs, to think that there's not a direct path. You can get there in different ways. Certainly, I'm proof of that. And I quite enjoy the role. Right? You see me doing it a second time, very different kind of company.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a boomer. So like when I was a CFO, I became a CFO through public accounting. And without any statistical analysis, I would say that if you were to ask CFOs who are approximately my age, where they started their career, I would bet 80 to 90% of them started out in public accounting. It seemed, in the day, it did seem like a good path to get there, get the basics of finance and accounting, maybe take a controller type of job, and then, get promoted into the CFO or find one where you develop your skills. But you mentioned you never worked inside the company, but the CFO role is so external looking and externally focused these days that, it does seem like people with the background you had would make sense. So,
For
so
sure, for sure. But I think you bring up a really good point, which is I didn't have that accounting background, right? So my understanding with our board at the time was, my first hire has to be a really strong controller. I really need to feel that side of the house is well covered, and it doesn't mean that you step away, right? Like you have to understand what's happening, and you have to be there to guide, to mentor. But I needed to know there was an expert in that area who really had been brought up to deal with those issues. And that was something that, I really wanted to make sure that was understood at the very beginning, and continues to be how I operate here as well.
Yeah, I mean, you probably weren't brought in because they saw your potential in closing the monthly financial statements. Yeah, probably they had other aspirations. So
I might detract from that, if anything.
yeah. I was a CPA, and I probably made it worse too for looking back. So, but so you joined Rent the Runway, and it was your first CFO type job. And again, I don't have any inside knowledge, but it was, I spoke to some search people who are looking to, place that role. And it was certainly one of the most competitive and, compelling CFO jobs in the country that year that you were joined, that you joined the company. And going a limb, you were probably brought in with the idea that you could execute an exit, be it an IPO or, get acquired by somebody. Is that a fair assumption on my part?
I think that was definitely at the back of, of the board or the management team's mind as one of the factors. I vividly recall one of my interviews with the CEO, and I'm someone who likes to be in the weeds. I'm someone who likes to understand how the business works and really get pretty deep, which doesn't mean that you don't still elevate, right? You have to be able to be strategic. But she was really looking for a partner. She really was looking for someone who could not just be the finance partner, but be the partner in the journey of the business. And we understood each other pretty early on, the questions, the interaction, the vision, right? I wanted to understand the vision, the strategies, and I think even the kind of questioning, and I think that comes a little bit from the banking background and also from the investing background. I think that was all part of it as well, is kind of the willingness to kind of jump in. And then from my side, finance had not really been at the table. It didn't even report into the CEO at that time. And so for me, it was also a way to be able to bring finance into the equation. Because I'd never been a CFO before, most of how I thought about the role was really having observed many CFOs over time through my banking experience. You work on an IPO, you spend 12 months with a management team, particularly the CEO, the CFO, sometimes the COO as well. and you get to see what are some great traits and what are some traits that aren't as good. And I kind of pick and chose the pieces that I thought were most interesting to create my CFO role, if you will, and then learned and adapted along the way.
Well, that sounds great. So tell me a little bit about the team that you had at Rent the One Way, because you went through a very successful IPO, but sometimes the team that gets you there doesn't have the skills to lead you after the transaction. So, you sort of need to change up the early people who it's nothing wrong with either group, right? But sort of sometimes the early finance accounting, smaller company, different skill set, maybe an entrepreneurial mindset. You're focusing on the transaction and then life after the transaction. It just can be different people. So how'd you work with your team when you were brought in with this vision?
Sure. So I would say when I joined, the company had already been around for about 6 years, right? So there had already been a crew of people who had been there from the foundation of the company as they were developing the concept. And Rent the Runway was interesting because it was really disrupting a massive space, and the way women get dressed, right? So for the first time ever, you don't buy clothes anymore. Now you're going to be renting clothes, right? So there was a lot to be done around thinking about what the idea was and educating the consumers, educating the brand, educating the market. And so you have people who were extremely passionate about the mission and what we were trying to do, and who were very scrappy. In fact, that was one of our core values. Scrappiness is a virtue, and that scrappiness is great. But you get to a certain point in time, and I'd say maybe I was part of it, or along the kind of time frame that I came in, that the company was looking for kind of the next level of professionalization and the next level of scaling. And so that happens with the people as well. So as I came in, we switched out the controller. We brought in someone who had some public company experience. And then, the company didn't go public for another few years. And so over time, we were continually adding skills and preparing, right? Because as you don't prep in a few months, you're really preparing over many, many years to be able to get to a point where you can go public. And so we were balancing, advancing the team, growing the team, adding functions. So another example, we didn't have tax in-house. We decided, okay, now we're getting big enough, we want to be able to bring that in-house. We grew the FP&A team because we wanted to have specific partners for all the business areas. So over time, you scale and you grow. And then as we were getting closer, we were adding more functions. We were beefing up our controls people. We were beefing up the IT side of the house, as well as the finance side of the house, adding internal audit, adding investor relations. So you do it along the way. So someone told me something which really stuck with me, which is, if you think about a company growing, and if the company is tripling in size, you almost need the leaders and the managers to also be tripling themselves in terms of their impact.
That's an interesting perspective. I like that. So
yeah, and when you think of it that way, it's a pretty big expectation, right? So we did have to, at different points in time, change out the team and have different people. Some people also prefer the early days, right? Some people prefer that kind of scrappy approach, which is very productive and can get you quite far. But there are times when you need to systematize a bit more and you need to professionalize a bit more. And so we went through that scaling a few different points in time.
yeah, I was actually one of those CFOs. I was pretty good from, 0 to 65, say, get you on the highway. But, if you had aspirations of taking the company public, you needed to go faster than 65 miles an hour.
Right.
Maybe I could have done it. Maybe I couldn't have. I don't really know. But I do know that there are a lot of people who could do it better than I could. So I had, my niche that, gave me a very fulfilling career. I liked what I did. And, and then hand it off to somebody like you when the time's appropriate. So it's a good model. So, but what are some of the key learnings that you can share with our audience about, preparing for and going public? Just because a lot of the listeners are with, venture-backed and PE-backed startups, and visions of IPOs dance in their head, as they say. So,
right. So many different learnings and so many things to think about. Number one, it is a journey, right? So, you can put on a piece of paper when you start the process and when you think you're going public, and that could look like 12 months or it could look like 18 months, depending on where you are. But the reality is there's a lot of work that has to happen ahead of that. And it's not inexpensive work, right? So a bunch of work on the finance side to automate, to bring on robust systems, to upgrade your ERP potentially, and that ties to your technology as well. A bunch of work around controls, right? So there's a lot of kind of prepping along the way that has to happen, and it's a balance because some of that prepping can be quite expensive. So you might start and realize, okay, we're not quite ready, and you might stop and then have to start again later. So, first, it is a long amount of time to be able to do that. In terms of the kind of the story itself and going public, a few things I would say. I think one is predictability of the business and the performance of the business. I think is really, really critical. So, you can't imagine being able to try to guide the street and try to guide analysts on how you're going to perform if you yourself don't have some confidence around the predictability of the business. And there always will be something that happens, right? So you have to have, enough of a way to figure out how to deal with that, because there will be another external element or something that will show up. So I think predictability of performance is really important. I think also the story that you're trying to tell, right? So do you have all the pieces of the story to be able to tell it? We tested the waters, right? So the ability to go in front of investors before you're even going, before it even is an investment for them, and to have some, we actually before that had crossover investors on our own cap table, so that we could have a little bit of the public lens and sense for what were they looking for, both in terms of expectations, it could be around KPIs, but also around business performance, right? So I think there are many parts of the storytelling that you have to feel really good about as well. And that you have had a chance to test it and get some feedback and incorporate some of that feedback. You also find that you tell people things and you want to be able to come back and deliver on those things, right? So it's a little bit about the performance, but it could be also about business operations as well. So those are some of the things that I would say are important. Critically, team, right? So having the right team. After all, it's not a moment in time, right? It's not about just getting there, and then there's everything that happens after that, and making sure that you have a team, because as the CFO in particular, oftentimes you are the most involved, if not, or in the group of most involved, if not the most involved. So to know that you have a team who is back at the house, who is able to continue to run the day to day, to continue to drive that performance, is really important as well, because you're going to be spending all your time in meetings with bankers or research analysts or drafting the S1 of the business. So a lot of preparation, I believe has to go into it, and just remembering that it continues on beyond that as well.
That makes sense. Yeah, I don't know very many successful CFOs that don't have a completely trusted second in command, whether it be a VP of finance, controller, chief accounting officer, just somebody they know can, without question, make the trains run on time. It sounds like you had that there. So cool. Well,
and it's a group of people, right? It takes a people.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But somebody once sort of described to me an IPO. Obviously it's a financial transaction, and other than the formation of the company, it's the biggest transaction in a company's history. But it's also a bit of a cultural event as much as it's a financial, because you sort of go and, it's like, one day you're this cool entrepreneurial company, and then the next day you have to behave like a publicly traded company. And it's not truly one day and another. But how does it change a company's culture for better and for worse?
Yeah, I think it changes it. There's a lot of anticipation, right? So I think managing the communication around it is something that you want to do carefully. And you don't want to get people too excited about it too early, because you just never know what might happen, whether it's the markets or something else. And yet there's of course a core group of people who know. But I think people get excited because people are very proud, right? So in particular, at the Runway, I think it's a business that's done a tremendous job, hiring people who are very, very passionate about that mission. And because it was a mission that was disruptive, that was difficult to do, that was difficult to convey, it took a lot of storytelling. Getting to the other side, I think, made everyone really feel proud of all the work they had done over many, many years to get to that point. The reality is the day-to-day doesn't really change. The accountability, if you were driving accountability before, you're still driving accountability, it's just much more visible, right? So one of the things that changes is there's more transparency, especially depending on how you manage communication with employees. There's a lot more transparency, certainly after earnings are reported. than you would have had before. So people have much easier way of telling how has their work impacted the performance of the business. But from a cultural standpoint, I think the culture is there to start out with, right? And
Sure.
what people believe in and kind of what brings them all together and what drives them. That doesn't really change. It's just that you have more visibility, both in the public markets, but also in terms of the performance of the business. And sometimes that can be disruptive too, right? Because sometimes the stock will move in a way that is not understandable, and so people don't quite understand that. But I think culturally, it wasn't such a big change, at least from my perspective, just because the culture was so strong to start out with.
Makes a lot of sense. So I'd love to chat with you a little about Leaf Home now.
Sure.
You had a great run there, and now you're at what seems like another high potential company. And this will be the officially, I'll give you a warning, this will be the dumbest question I'm going to ask during this conversation. What attracted you to the role at Leaf Home?
Sure. So it took me a little bit of time. I took a bit of a break after I left Rent the Runway, and it took me a little bit of time first to even figure out what I wanted to do. And in the end, I ended up chatting with this company for almost 6 months, from the very first conversation. And I joined for a few different reasons. One, I like to learn, and I will continue to be a learner at heart and want to continue to develop and grow. So I was pretty excited about the fact that it was a different industry and I would get to have to learn all over again. Having said that, I'm really excited about the space that the company plays in. It's a very large market. There's a very large market opportunity. We're very early on in gaining market share in that market. And at the same time, the company has scaled quite a lot, right? So the company's scale to me was really a testament to its competitive advantage, right? The fact that it's able to win, the fact that its products resonate with customers. So sometimes you have a large market, but the products don't quite match. So the scale to me was a bit of that testament. So the combination of a very exciting market, a mission that I think is really important. As you can see, I've mentioned mission twice. So it's one of the things that motivates me. People care a lot about their homes, and we're trying to help homeowners manage their homes and simplify home ownership for them by providing these great home improvement products. And that really resonated with me. And then I think about, so that's, today and where it is today. But I also think a lot about what's the future. What are their growth opportunities here? And there are a few different axes of growth and future prospects for the business. As a finance person, of course, financial track record. So strong growth, profitability were really important, and were there. And then, of course, not least important, in fact, very, very important, is the people. Right. So I spent, part of the reason why it took me 6 months is I spent some time getting to know the people, getting to know some of the investors, trying to understand the culture. And it's really all those things. Now, having said all that, it's not that different than the type of analysis that you do as an investor, as you look to look for another investment as a venture capitalist. It's a very similar type of checklist approach that I used before. Just spent more time on the people side. And I think the people side is because of the Rent the Runway experience that I realized that the people are what make the experience, right? And just having great people around you, great people you can rely on, great people you collaborate with, it makes a huge difference.
That makes sense. And now that you gave such a thoughtful answer, I no longer think my question was all that dumb. So thanks for bailing me out. So, but you've been with the company about 4 months. Is that about right?
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the big things, in fact, I have I write for Forbes, and my second most downloaded article was the article. I'm from Boston, but article was the first 90 days. So, and it's really a chance for CFOs and presumably other C-suite executives as well to really make an impact, learn the business a little bit. But, what were your first 90 days like? What was the things you've learned in it, relationships formed, maybe a few things that surprised you despite the level of due diligence that you did?
Sure. So I'm still learning the industry, right? So the company has done a really nice job. It really offers an end-to-end solution from the moment you are trying to acquire a lead to the moment you're trying to convert that in a call center to then getting a salesperson to show up at your door, right? So just understanding that process, I feel like I understand the high level, but I probably have a few more levels deeper to get through, and I didn't quite finish that, right? So I started the learning and the understanding of what the business is. I'm still learning about the industry and the markets, and those are some of the things that I gave myself as challenges, is trying to really dig in a little bit. What I found is it takes time to dig in, and it takes time to spend time with the operations person, with the call center person, with the salesperson, and really get in there. So on the one hand, you want to give yourself time to learn so that you don't just jump in and make suggestions and recommendations. And at the same time, you want to act, right? And so finding that balance has been what I've been trying to do. There are some things that are done here that are different than how they were done at Rent the Runway. One of the things that I really loved over there is cross-functional work, and really bringing all the different stakeholders to the table, and really having a chance to give everyone visibility, up funnel, down funnel, so that everyone has an understanding and common transparency around where are we, and therefore how do we get to where we want to be. So that's been a little bit of what I focused my time on, is learning a lot, but also trying to bring some of these processes and some of these methods of work that I found really, really helpful in my past experience. My third week on the job, I had the pleasure of presenting our budget to our board. So that was a bit jarring.
Third week, huh? Hopefully it was more or less accurate.
Well, we'll find out, right? We have a bit more time to go. So that was particularly challenging to, in 3 weeks, try to learn enough to be able to talk to the budget and the understanding of it, and have some confidence. So that was a little bit harder, but look, it's been great to get to know the people. And I realize what seems like something fairly simple on the outside is actually quite complicated, and that's the part that is not necessarily a surprise, but something I need to keep working on and continuing to learn. It's also great to meet the people, right? And building relationships, as it takes time, right? So it's not something you get done in 3 months or 4 months or whatever it might be.
No, I mean, it's, you probably, not you, but the CFO, joins a hot company, they're probably going to be there, 5 years, right? And they're going to be going great guns the entire time. So the first 90 days, it is an opportunity. There's not a lot of pressure on you to deliver, right? I mean, you can't exactly put your feet up on the desk and say, call me in June or something, but it is the rare chance you can learn, you can ask a bunch of questions, you can get to know your team, you can get to know the investors and the board members. It's such a rare opportunity. And, from what I know about you from this conversation, you seem like you have a bias towards doing stuff, right? Just give me stuff to do, but hopefully it sounds like you did take the opportunity to develop those relationships and, to learn what you could about the business. So.
Yeah. For sure. And that will continue, right? So I'm a big believer in continuing to ask the questions. And I was still learning up to the very end when I left Rent the Runway. So I'm sure I'll look back on this day and think, wow, I really didn't know that much yet. But I also, I've not hired too much yet since I've gotten here, but I did hire a senior leader on my team. And my advice for him for his first 90 days was just learn as much as you can about the business, go shadow some people, and build personal relationships, right? Because in the end, like, that is what will allow you to be able to have impact on the organization. So those 3 things, I think, are the most important. And that's what I advise him to do as well.
That's great advice. I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to pause it. Okay, that's great. So the thing about Leaf Home is it's been a really remarkable growth story. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been largely organic, but you have done some of the growth through acquisitions. Is that fair to say?
We have done some acquisitions,
Okay.
done some tuck-ins in some product areas.
So now the pressure's on. How do you keep that growing? And so how do you develop like a financial strategy that's going to support the growth expectations that your investors and others have set for the company?
Yeah, so it's I forgot to mention one other reason I'm here, which is our chief growth officer here. We work together at Rent the Runway. So
okay. So
someone that I've known before. She went somewhere else in between, but we have an engine that works, and part of the challenge here is we're navigating volatile markets and consumers that are a little bit uncertain at times. So the advantage of this business is that we play in the part of home improvement that is more need to have, like things that are about hardening your home, about increasing the value of this important asset that you've invested in, like gutters, like water filtration, right? So it's one of the things that insulates us a little bit. It doesn't mean that we don't still have to be super watchful of what's happening in the markets. Our challenges are, how do we think about diversifying our approach in the market, right? So one, however we were acquiring leads historically, continuing to think about additional channels that we can add, and owning more of that ourselves is something we think about a lot. We have a lot of opportunity to grow demographics and bring on a younger population. So that's another way to continue to kind of propel the growth of the business. And then I think a lot about the fact that we have 1.5 million customers. For a very long part of the company's history, it was all about gutter protection and gutters. So these emerging products that we have a lot of opportunity to sell those products now to that existing base, in addition to the fact that we can use those products as a way to bring on new customers. So that's another way that we think about continuing to propel kind of a steady state growth of the business. And then finally, we're only in certain parts of the home. So we have opportunity to look where else in the home can we be differentiated. Again, we have this model, we have these 200 offices, we have this infrastructure that already exists. And so now the challenge is, what else can we put through that infrastructure in a way that's actually really good financially and cost efficient, because we don't have to go rebuild that again, right? So those are some of the ways that we continue to grow the business, both with what we already have, but also thinking about what are the products in the future.
Okay, that makes a whole lot of sense. So yeah, well, you grew up in France, so you might not know the reference, but there was a 1980s song, "The Future's So Bright, I Gotta Wear Shades." Do you know that one?
I do
So
not.
I found out as an adult, it's not an uplifting song. It's actually about a guy's fear of nuclear war. But neither here nor there. But I still use the phrase the way me and the rest of the world interpreted back in the 1980s. So, but I want to get back. So Leaf Home, obviously a digital leader in your space, maybe the digital leader in your space for all I know. But again, so what's the strategy to support the company? Because I'm going to guess if you don't keep investing in innovation and R&D and coming up with new products and services and processes, someone's going to kind of catch up to you on this. So have you thought that through, like how you support the innovation in a fiscally and financially responsible way?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have a dedicated group of people that are constantly thinking about not just the next level of products, but even the existing products, right? So what can we do to make the products more differentiated, to make the products more attractive to consumers and really respond to their needs? So there is a dedicated group of people who are all about more of that R&D side of the house, but they're also matched up to our product marketing team, where their job is to really understand what's happening in the market, to really understand what are the opportunities, how big are these markets, how penetrated are they, what kind of demographic are we going after, what are they looking for? So really pulling those two together, and it's a balancing act, right? So we want to continue to, we have great products today, right? And we know that we are very undertapped in terms of the potential of the market, right? So there's still a lot of room to grow with the products that we have today, but you're absolutely right. We also need to be thinking about, what carries growth with the business over the next few years, and continually be assessing, either evolutions of those products or else adjacent products. So that's something that we think about all the time.
Okay. Well, that's really fantastic. And what I'd love to chat with you about now is one of the critical relationships in a company, not just across the C-suite, but the entire company, is that between the CFO and the CEO. And, you mentioned you did a lot of due diligence before joining, got to meet the players. And, I'd love to get your advice, even if it's not specific to the current CEO, but how should a CFO think about building a trusting, empowering relationship with the CEO?
Sure. And I'm a big believer in the CEO-CFO relationship. I'm building a relationship still here, and we spend a lot of time together and really think about the strategies of the business and what we're trying to accomplish. And those strategies are not just financial, it can be business strategies as well as financial strategies. So this is something that is happening here. It's very similar to how it was for me at Rent the Runway. And I would say generally, I think it needs to be a very open relationship, a very transparent relationship, and ability to be able to talk about really anything, and to be able to challenge each other and be okay with being right or being wrong at different points in time. That to me feels like a really solid relationship. So for me, what has worked really well is is to have very open lines of communication, to really think about where we are today and be able to talk today about the execution, what we need to accomplish this week, this month, this quarter, just as much as being able to talk about where do we want to be in 3 years' time, and working backwards, what are the things that we need to be able to accomplish now, right? Or what we want to put in motion right now. And so those have been some of the things that have worked really well. In my prior role, we got to a point, and it was most obvious really in our earnings conversations or conversations with investors, where I could talk to the business and the strategies around the business, and she could talk just as easy to all the strategies around the finance, and really be able to like understand each other's thoughts there, and complete the full picture of the company. So I think it's really important to create those relationships, and like I said, start with very open lines of communication, and really think about what's best for the business. If you have commonality of mission and goals, pushing each other a little bit in certain areas is healthy and appropriate. And I believe in different perspectives, and the complementary I think is quite strong.
Yep, you need to challenge people. There was a quote I learned years ago that if two people always agree on everything, one of them isn't really needed. So, and that they need you to respectfully disagree from time to time. So, but now given your business model, you probably have a very productive relationship with the CIO as well. And, because it just technology is such a core part of everything about your company. And so how do you develop that relationship in particular?
Yeah, so similar to the relationship with the CEO, we're developing it. So, my approach has been to spend a lot of time with my peers, and to really have a chance to dig into their areas. Our CIO and I meet weekly, and we have a chance to talk about, some of the efforts of the business, in terms of what she's working on. So we are a tech-enabled business. So tech is at the core of what we do. We want to move away as much as we can, and we have, in fact, moved away from many of the manual processes that existed for the company, in particular in the field, to more automated processes, things that allow us to help with efficiency, with costs, with administrative workflow, right? So these are things that we work on together, but also think about, similarly, what is the roadmap for technology? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We're in the middle of a pretty significant CRM implementation of Salesforce right now, and that's something that encompasses the whole business. And yet she and I are very closely working together, because there's, of course, a lot of cost, but there's potential really, really good impact for the business. And so we want to understand, what are we doing? What are some of the trade-offs around some of the other projects that we're working on? What are the priorities, right? So it's a strategic relationship, but it also can be quite tactical, and really thinking about the prioritization of what we work on, and making sure that we're thinking about financial impact, we're thinking about, return to the business, and making sure that not only just the two of us are thinking that way, but we're really helping to disseminate that message throughout the business. So that's how we're partnering together, is really holding people accountable to understanding the impact of what they're asking for in terms of technology needs, or software development, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and it's such a critical one. So cool. One thing about you I thought was a little interesting, Scarlett. You've been on you're on one board right now, but I think you've on, or maybe perhaps you're on more than one board right now. But you've been on multiple boards during your career. And I'm always curious, how does being on a board impact how you execute your role as a CFO, if at all? So
it's such a great question. I'm currently only on one board, and it's a private company. It's actually a company that I've been with for many, many years now. So I started with a company as an investor, and now I'm on as an, I represented that investment as the kind of the investor on the board, but now I'm an independent on that board. And I'll talk to that for a second, but really I'll widen it pretty quickly. It's been really, really helpful to be on that board, and I really enjoy the board interactions. It's a different kind of involvement, right? It's not the day-to-day involvement. You get a chance to be closer to the business, to understand a bit more of what's going on in the business, but you're not the one actually operating or actually driving the day-to-day decisions of the board, right? So it's always helpful to have other board members around the table, their perspectives, their experiences. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about it, in addition to the fact that what they're doing day to day could be relevant to your business. Now, Olivella is a little bit less relevant to my business today, given that it's in the fashion space. It was really interesting to be on that board when I was at Rent the Runway, because they might be approaching the market in a different way than we were, and there were some interesting learnings that I could bring back in both directions. But what's interesting about being on boards is I now realize how painful I may have been as a board member when I was just an investor, because you don't have an appreciation of what it takes to get things done, right? So it's easy to sit in the board seat and say, well, why don't you change strategy? Or why aren't you approaching the market in this way? Or why aren't you selling a different kind of product? And you realize now being here, I realize those things take time, and there are strategies, and there's iteration, and there's errors to be made to learn from, right? So much that has to happen for something to show up in a boardroom that is difficult to appreciate until you're yourself an operator. By the way, that's why I'm here, is because I had that curiosity. I was just always really wondering, what is it like on the other side?
Yeah.
So the CEO of Olivale, I think, appreciates me more now, that I feel her pain and can appreciate the challenges than when I was an investor and would ask the question, well, why aren't you doing it differently? Or why can't the numbers be a little bit better?
Yeah, I remember when I was a CFO, I was with venture-backed startups, and they were good people and good business people, and they weren't unreasonable by any stretch of the imagination. But often they'd ask like really dumb questions that they thought were like penetrating and thoughtful. And they own the company, and you have to be respectful of everybody, but particularly the people who own the company. But it's like, gee, why didn't I think of that? It's like, you really think we didn't consider that? Or, do you really think I can just snap my fingers like Thanos and make it happen? Boy, I'm making far too many pop culture references on this call for some reason. So, but tell me, who Thanos is at least.
Who what?
Thanos?
No, I don't.
Oh, you're killing me. The Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's the big purple guy that snapped his fingers and wiped out half of civilization or something.
I see. Okay.
Oh boy. Yeah. It's funny. Your daughters probably know.
Homework now.
But so this is probably a good segue to, I always like to ask CFOs about work-life balance.
Yeah.
And in your case, it's probably, pretty difficult. You've got a very busy job as a CFO. And you're on a board, and you do have 2 college-age daughters. So you have a lot going on. How do you find the time to do all of those things? And then, find me time, and, perhaps you have some hobbies that are outside of all of those things. How do you approach it as best you can?
As best I can is a perfect way to put it. It is a challenge, and I feel like I continue to learn here. I have found it difficult at times, to be perfectly honest, with the work-life balance. A little bit easier now that the kids are in college, so they're not there when I get home. But when they were younger, trying to find the time to do your job and to be a mom, and to try to have some hobbies, and spend some time with yourself and your spouse, and it's a lot, right? So I find it difficult to find that work-life balance. And, in fact, I needed a moment to recharge. I took 6 to 7 months off between jobs to go and take that time back for myself and spend some time. So I'm trying to be much more intentional now. So I came in here with that thought in mind of not allowing myself to be consumed as much as I had before, as exciting as it is, right? Because you have passion for a business, you're excited about the mission. I have passion for this business as well, but I'm trying to be much more intentional, right? So a couple of really silly examples, I'm now within a reasonable commute of my office. And so I'm trying, for example, it's 2 miles, I'm trying to walk one way at least one of the day, one of the times that I'm going into the office. And so it's little mechanisms like this. I want to try to spend time with the family. So I right now my kids are home from college, so I'm being much more mindful about being home and spending time with them, because I don't get to see them as much anymore. So as you said, build time for hobbies. So anytime I can get out there and play a little tennis and try to do some hobbies, I find that's a good way to decompress and to take my mind off of work. So I'm trying to be intentional. It's also, by the way, a super important example for your team and for your peers as well, for them to see that.
I hear you. All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, as the saying goes. So, if I may ask, what are your daughters studying? Are they following your world into business?
Your finance, if that's the question. So one of them is pre-med right now, so she's looking at the medical field, and the other one is studying psychology and children's studies, and she's trying to figure out what that means. So we have yet to see.
Good for them.
Neither near finance. I don't know whether it was looking at me or not, but they've chosen different fields.
Well, hey, and good for them, right? They're probably fellow MBA, I mean, I worked hard, created a lot of jobs along the way, as did you, and I did a lot of good, but they're clearly motivated by, a desire to help people in a more tangible way than you and I did, perhaps. So, and it's very admirable that they would go into those fields of work. So, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm thrilled for them. They're both super excited about what they're studying and what they're getting to see. So yeah, I'm super happy for them.
Good for them. So I always ask people a fun fact, but you gave yours away earlier that you lived in, you grew up in France and you've spent a lot of time in Europe. Did your girls get to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't call them girls, were your daughters get to live in France at any point along the way?
So they haven't lived there. They've lived in a few other countries because not only was I an expat child, we did that to them as well. So they're both born in London, and
Oh, nice.
they travel quite a bit, but they did not live in France. But we go back quite a bit. I have family not too far, so we go back once a year if we're able to.
Oh,
And
nice.
those times are precious now, with them in college. So we're going to try to do that again.
Yeah, I'm always jealous because I spent most of my life, I've lived in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and that's it. I'm like the most vanilla human being on the planet sometimes, I think, when I talk to people. But anyway, but my concluding question, Scarlett, is you've had a great career, great learning along the way. What's your advice to the next generation of CFOs? What should they be thinking about to attain the role if they haven't yet, and then flourish once they do?
Yeah, so maybe a few different things. We talked about this in the beginning of the conversation. I think I'm an example of the fact that the path is not linear. So, take the risk. Me going into a CFO role was an experiment. Take the risk. Go after that experiment. This is my third career, so you can get there in many different ways, and that's okay, right? I think there are many ways to get the CFO role if that's something you're interested in. The second thing I would say is, again, something I've referred to is the importance of relationships. Both my Rent the Runway experience as well as the experience here first came about because of people I had worked with historically, and we stayed in touch, and especially people that you really value and respect, to stay closely in touch with. You never know where those relationships can take you. And then I've mentioned mission. So when you work with a single company, the importance of mission and really believing in the product, the services, what the company stands for, makes such a big difference, because there will be ups and downs, as you know. And so to have that to live by is really critical. And then finally, the people, right? We've talked about the importance of people, and I say specifically, if you're in the role, having a great team, hiring for people who are experts in their area, who know way more about those areas than you will, and bringing up the whole team as a result of that. Those would be some of the things that I think are the most important. And then finally, the thing you just talked about, which is, to remember when it's time to take a break, and when it's time to, take a little bit of a pause, and then recharge.
Absolutely. Well, Scarlett, this has been a great conversation. I know you got a lot going on, so I do want to thank you for your time. And I always like to let the guests have the final word if they want it.
Jack, I just wanted to thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate you reaching out, and really was a great discussion. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.